Hello, everybody. My name is Kyglo Webb, and welcome back to another episode of Spicy Coding Academy. This is where we will be covering FreeCodeCamp in the meantime. If you don't know what FreeCodeCamp is, it is a free learning platform that allows you to learn so many different topics. They do ask for donations because they have put a lot of time and a lot of work into providing this. The only thing is that for FreeCodeCamp, it is self-taught. So there are tutorials, but you do not have mentorship or a community necessarily the same way as we do at Spicy Coding Academy. So if you're interested in learning in a fun community with mentorship, tests, challenges, and trivia and games, definitely check out Spicy Coding Academy because we have an upcoming cohort that is ready to start pretty soon. February 20th, 2023, we will be accepting our first cohort ever. But in the meantime, let's learn about JavaScript. Now, we took off last time down here towards I'd say a little down here, around the manipulate the arrays. We did push and pop. And now we're going to go from manipulate arrays with shift all the way down to assignment with a return value. And if you want me to cover before this, let me know and I can definitely make a video on that. But starting where we left off, manipulate arrays with shift. So pop always removes the last element of an array. What if you want to remove the first? So as we saw, pop removes the last, so shift is going to remove the first element. So remember, this right here, this bracket and this bracket says this is an array. The first element will always be on the far left. Const means, okay, this is const. We're going to put this in front of our array. Our array is declaring what type you want, what you want to call it. You can literally call it anything. You could call it cats, dogs, pigs. This is where you can get creative. And then const remove from our array creates a new variable where we will store the new result. So we call this array, and once we call it, we add the function .shift. And .shift, you can imagine something shifty, like maybe you could imagine a shift on the keyboard acting a little shifty to remind you, okay, it removes the first element. And maybe shifty is like slapping the number 1. These are little memory tricks we also use in Spicy Coding Academy that can be of help if you are interested. So our array.shift removes the first element. And once we do that, we will be left with J and then a nested array cat. So now it says use the .shift function to remove the first item from my array and assign the shifted off value to a new variable removed from my array. So similar pattern here. We have this array that's declared with one big array and then 2 tiny nested arrays. And it wants us to do something similar that we did right here. It wants us to assign the shifted off value to a new variable. So let's start down here. We want to create a new variable where we can store the new amount, the new array. So let's create a new variable, const removed from my array, and now we're going to make it equal. So this means we're going to store the new amount into this variable, and this variable is very descriptive. It's saying exactly what we want to do, what is going to be stored in there. So now I want you to guess, what are we going to call? Are we going to call this variable or this variable? If you guess this one, you're correct. My array. And then what function are we working with? If you said shift, you are correct. .shift. And then what does it want us to fill it? Do we fill this with anything? Well, here's a question. If you're removing, you don't need a fill, right? So we're going to keep this empty. And then we're going to do a semicolon to tell the computer we are done. So let's double check, run the tests, and we did it. And if you want an extra explanation of what we did, my array should now equal dog3 because shift removes the first element. And even though this is an array, it removes this whole part before the comma. So this whole part before the comma is what it removes when you have shift applied. And then remove from my array should now contain John 23. And then this new part is now inside remove from my array. Awesome. Now let's move on to the next challenge. Manipulate arrays with unshift. So if you can guess, if shift removed, then you can guess that shift will, or unshift will do something at the beginning of an array and it will add. So maybe for unshift, you can imagine an onion adding some spice to the first element, maybe some sprinkles. And this will remind you always when you think of unshift, think of onions adding spice to the beginning of an array. So unshift works exactly like push, but instead of adding the element at the end of the array, unshift adds the element at the beginning of the array. So const our array, here's our array, Simpson, jcat. We're going to shift. Remember what shift does? It removes elements at the beginning, and then our array.unshift adds this string right here. And what is that going to do? After the shift, our array would have the value jcat because it removed the first element. After the unshift, our array would have the value happy jcat because it sprinkles on and the front of that element happy. So now it wants us to add Paul35 to the beginning of the myArray variable using unshift. So let's think this through before I give away the answer. We have the array declared, and we know it's declared because there's an equal sign. We have a big array because those brackets, and we have two nested smaller arrays. And it says myArray.shift. So what do you think shift does? Imagine that image at the beginning with the shift keyboard strangling or slapping the one, or just angry. You can just imagine it angry at the one, yelling at the one. And it's going to remove from the first element. So this is considered the first element because it's before the comma. And now it says only change code below this line. So it says add Paul35 to the beginning of the myArray variable using unshift. So what variable do you think we want to call? If you guessed myArray, you are correct. But remember, it is case sensitive. We have to have it the exact same way or else the computer will not understand. So myArray dot unshift, we're going to add what we want into it, and then we're going to finish with the semicolon saying, all right, we are done. Let's check for our answer. And we did it. And if we want further explanation or what we did, it says now Paul35 is at the beginning right here after this was removed. So we have Paul35 and dog3. All right, to the next we go. Shopping list. Create a shopping list in the variable myList. The list should be a multi-dimensional array containing several subarrays. The first element in each subarray should contain a string with the name of the item. The second element should be a number representing the quantity. So remember, anything within these are strings, and anything without them are numbers. Anything with these brackets are enclosed within an array. So right here we have our array myList, and we're going to create 5 sub arrays, 5 nested arrays. So I'm going to do, let's see, we're going to do candy, the basics, that's 1. We're going to do another one, apple, a little healthy, make sure you get your 1 apple a day, keeps the doctor away. We're going to do corn, because everything has corn in it nowadays, am I right? Now we're going to do something else. Let's do cheese, because who does not like cheese? Cheese is just one of those things that you have it all the time. Milk for days. Got to get that milk. Let's count. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That is the total of 5. And remember, the index of an array always starts at 0. So we might read it as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the way the computer reads it is that this index, this would be found at 0. So if I wanted to call candy 1, it would be my list bracket 0. That calls the first one. And then if I wanted to call this one, it'd be my list 1, 2, 3, 4, which adds to 5. So let's double check and make sure everything is A-okay. And looks like we have an issue. Can you guys guess what the issue is? I'll give you a little hint. It has to do with the array. And if you guessed, these are all mini arrays, so it doesn't work. This is one array. We're not calling mini arrays. If we want to have nested arrays, what do we have to do? We have to put and enclose them in one major array. That's how you have the ability, the capacity to be able to do a multi-nested array. Once we do that, boom, we did it. Great job. Write reusable JavaScript with functions. So we can divide up our code into reusable parts called functions. Here's an example of a function. Now, I want you to imagine a function as a block. Whenever you call that function, you can use it. It is like chunks of intelligent blocks that work and do exactly as you want. There's one block that might chop the salad. There's another block that might sprinkle cheese on the salad. There's another block that might put the dressing on. It is a very specific function that can be called whenever you need it within your code. So you can call or invoke this function by using its name followed by parentheses like this. Function name semicolon. Each time the function is called, it will print out the message hello world on the dev console. This is the dev console. All of the code between the curly braces will be executed every time the function is called. So it says create a function called reusable function which prints the string hi world. So we're going to start out with saying function, reusable function, parentheses, and then within it we're going to do console.log hi world. And then we're going to end with a semicolon and we are going to test our code. Look at this, reusable function. You should call reusable function once it is defined. So what do you think we did wrong here? We didn't do the second part. So always make sure you read, because if you don't, you're not going to do it. And then what happens when we do it? Boom. If you go down here, reusable function should be a function. It is. If reusable function is called, it should output the string hi world to the console. It is. You should call a reusable function once it is defined. This is calling the function. And look, it prints out twice because function, boom, boom. This console.log is actually more so for debugging than it is for other things. So this really helps whenever you want to debug your program to write a console.log in there to make sure it's doing what you want it to do. But it is not necessary to have this. So that's for future in scenarios. All right, passing values to functions with arguments. Parameters are variables that act as placeholders for the values that are to be input to a function when it is called. So parameter is just a fancy way of saying anything enclosed inside the parentheses. So when a function is defined, it is typically defined along the one or more parameters. The actual values that are input or passed into a function when it is called are known as arguments. So once you know the actual value, that becomes an argument. But you can also write argument in here. It's not going to matter if you say arg or param. Here's a function with two parameters. Function test fun param1, param2, council.log param1, param2. When we call test fun like this, hello world, we passed in hello into test fun, and then world into the second parameter 2. We have passed two string arguments inside the function. Param will equal string hello, and param2 will equal the string world. Note that you could call test fun again with different arguments, and the parameters would take on the value of the new arguments. So now it wants us to create a function called function with args that accepts two arguments and outputs their sum to the dev console. Call the function with two numbers as arguments. So we're going to start out with function with args, and then what does it want? Two arguments, and outputs their sum to the dev console. So I'm going to put in here param1, param2, and then it says call the function with two numbers as arguments, and it wants us to output their sum. So we take param1 and then we add it to param2, and here it wants us to output it, so we're going to put it around town, and we're going to end with the semicolon to say, hey computer, we are done. And it says call the function with two numbers as arguments. So do you remember what call the function was? It doesn't show us here, but let's see if you know what it is. All right, now let's do it. Boom, boom. This is the function that we are calling, and when we do, down here, call the function with two numbers as arguments. And remember, we can't forget the last part, with two numbers as arguments. So we have param1, param2 simply as placeholders, but here we need two numbers. So let's see if you can guess what numbers I'm going to pick. All right, I'm going to pick two numbers. If you can guess what two numbers I'm going to pick, it's going to be pretty impressive. Boom, boom. Did you guess? Let's see. I guess you'll have to write in the comments to tell me. Next one, return a value from a function with return. We can pass values into a function with arguments. You can use a return statement to send a value back out of a function. So, function plus 3 num, return num plus 3. Const answer equals plus 3, 5. Answer has a value 8. Plus 3 takes an argument for num and returns a value equal to num plus 3. So, this may look a little like a lot, especially if you're just starting out, but it is actually not too bad. It wants us to create a function called times 5. So we're going to take this, we're going to declare it's a function. And what does it do right here? They pass in an argument, a parameter, num, and it says that accepts one argument, multiplies it by 5, and returns the value. So, returns the value, so we're going to return num, and it wants us to multiply it by 5. So return means, okay, this is what it wants us to output to the screen. So if we go down here, it says times 5 should be a function, times 5 should return 25, times 2 should return 10, times 5, 0, should return 0, excuse me. And it works. So return is just a fancy way of saying output this multiplication. Very, very easy. Global, scope, and functions. All right, so in JavaScript, scope refers to the visibility of variables. So if it's inside a function, that is a local variable. if it is outside of a function, that is a global variable. So variables which are declared without the let or const keywords are automatically created in the global scope. So even if you were to put in here, let's say just oops global, which we're about to do, it is still global. So that's the only time when that does not register. Even if you put it in here and you're like, oh, I want to make it a local variable, but you don't put let or const or var, it will actually become global, which could cause problems if you want it to be local. So it says, using let or const, declare a global variable named myGlobal outside of any function. So let's do let myGlobal. And since it's outside of the function, it's going to be global. It's not in the function. And we use let. It says initialize it with the value of 10. But oops, if we make the mistake and inside fun1, this function, assign 5 to oops global without using the var let const, this will also be global, but not in a good way. We don't want to initialize global variables necessarily in functions unless we absolutely have to, but most of the time we do not want to do that. It would be considered not the best practice. Oops global equals 5. And we test the code, boom, done. Local scope and functions. Variables which are declared within a function as well as the function parameters have local scope. That means they are only visible within that function. So any function has local scope. Outside of it, if you try to call, let's say, that variable, it's going to be like, hey, I don't know what you're talking about because I don't have access to it. It's in there. It's not out here. Just for example, like this, function myTest. Const lock equals foo. It calls, boom, it works. But if it were to be called here, that variable is within here. It is a local variable. So this is outside of the function brackets. And what does that do? Boom. It does not make sense. It says, hey, my var is not defined out here. So then it says the myTest function will display the string foo, but the one outside of it will throw an error because it's outside of the function. The editor has 2 console logs to help you see what is happening. Check the console as you code to see how it changes. Declare a local variable, myVar, inside myLocalScope and run the tests. So we're going to go up here, and what are we going to do? We're going to declare var myVar. And down here, we can add a number if you want. And inside my local scope, look, we got 5. But outside of that function, it's like, hey, I don't know what my var is. I can't see it. It's inside of a function, and it won't work. So console.log is really great for debugging because it tells you what the problem is. Sometimes you have to fish for the answer, but for the most part, it tells you. Spool up the FTL drive. So this will be our last one, and then we will stop from there. It is possible to have both local and global variables with the same name. When you do this, the local variable takes precedence over the global variable. Always remember, the more specific always takes precedence over the less specific. So, when you have an eyelash that's falling off your eye, you're going to focus more on the eyelash than you are going to focus on the rest of the world. Especially when it's causing your eye to get all red and hard of seeing because you're going to be like, oop, I need to get this out before I do anything else. So const sum var equals hat. That is global because it is outside of any function. And then function myFun const sum var is now equaling head. So this one is going to take precedence because it is a local variable. So when we return sum var, the function myFun will return the string head. Even though it was initialized up here hat, remember, the local variable always takes precedence. The more specific, the more local. It says add a local variable to myOutfit function to override the value of outerwear with the string sweater. So it makes it really easy. Const outerwear equals t-shirt. This is the global variable. But once we make a local variable, we're going to be able to make this the precedence. This one is going to be the one that will be returned because we are defining it and declaring it within a function, myOutfit. So we're going to go in here and we're going to type const, and then it says add a local variable to myOutfit function, override the value of outerwear with the string sweater. So add a local variable. So we're going to, since it's returning outerwear, we're going to use that as the variable of choice, and then we're going to change it to sweater. So this is a local variable which takes precedence over the global variable. And when we do that, we got to make sure, boom, it just helps. It makes it clean, it makes it pristine, and it helps. And then boom, we did it. And if we want to see what we did, we can look down here. It returns a string sweater. Alright everybody, that is the last lesson for today. If you're enjoying these videos, please give us a like or a follow. Subscribing is always nice, and we will be with you hopefully soon. Have a wonderful rest of the day.